Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Today it's time for more Legacy, and today I've chosen to go down a little bit of a different path. So I'll start off by talking about what I believe is the most important matchup to master coming into Eternal Weekend, which is the Blue-Black Reanimator Mirror. I will also say that with any kind of theory when it comes to Magic, I'm not here to say that I have the only answer to how to approach the matchup. I'm trying to lean on my experiences, my instinct, my experiences from other formats, how I like to play Magic, and then I'm going to come up with my solution to it. So you should see this as inspiration rather than just, something you should copy without any form of critique. So with that being said, let's get to it. I think we all know what this deck is trying to accomplish by now, so I'm not going to go too much into that. I just assume if you clicked on this video, you have some kind of experience with Blue-Black Reanimator, and you're looking to maybe solidify some ideas that you have, or get challenged on some of your beliefs, etc., etc. So let me just go through a few topics that I think are very, very true, and how the games can be either won or lost, or let's say pushed in the right direction. I think that's usually what you should do. You should say, this will give me a higher chance of winning rather than this will win the game. This is a simple nuance thing, but it's very true when it comes to a lot of things in Magic. So, first of all, it's very obvious, but Entomb for a fatty, force through a reanimation spell, either by just jamming it and not getting countered, or forcing it through with your Force Wheeler Daze, that is gonna win games. That is not something that is up for discussion. That is gonna win some games. The downside of that is when you entomb without having any reanimation spell, I generally don't advise doing that, or you get countered and the opponent reanimates your creature, then you obviously put yourself at huge risk. So those are the, let's call it, high variance games. They can end in quick fashion in both directions. So for a player like me, who generally think I'm pretty well versed when it comes to, long-term game plans, sculpting with cantrips, finding a good land spell ratio, playing my interaction at the right times, that's generally not where I want to go when it comes to a deck like this. So that brings me to the next topic. How else can a game be decided? I call it frog superiority. If you play a Psychic Frog, it does not get killed, or you fight over the removal spell, you will be in a highly advantageous position. So Psychic Frog, you need to kill on sight. Psychic Frog, you want to protect at most costs. Let me put it that way. I didn't say all costs, but most costs. That's very basic, not something you have that much, agency over. Maybe sometimes it's like play into days or not play into days. That's like your only agency. But yeah, Frog will determine games. That's just how it goes. All right. So Psychic Frog, aside from, drawing cards when it connects, can also manage your graveyard. Managing your graveyard is important against opposing reanimation spells. Let's say the opponent does not have any trolls in their graveyard, but you have a troll. Then all of a sudden, the Psychic Frog can counter opposing reanimation spells. So this card kind of does it all if it stays in play. The next card I want to talk about is Brazen Borrower, because it's a very normal play pattern that let's say you Fatal Push your opponent's Frog, then you reanimate it, and then the opponent can have Brazen Borrower. So this list will always have between 0 and 2 copies. It's not a card you should be incredibly scared about, but it's something you should definitely think about. If you have the option to reanimate out of your own graveyard, I suggest doing that. Then, of course, there's the corner case of you only have one creature, and you're playing towards miracling a Fanatic later. Then you might want to target the opponent's graveyard, knowing that leaving a troll in your graveyard will have some upside because you have 3 Metamorphosis Fanatics in your deck, and they can only take a creature card from your own graveyard. Nuanced stuff, but it's something, at least, think the thought out loud. What's the advantage? What's the disadvantage? That's basically how I do it. All right, last thing I want to talk about is the Metamorphosis Fanatic. Metamorphosis Fanatic is a card that when it's in your hand, it's oftentimes incredibly clunky unless you resolve a frog and do something, busted, like discard Fanatic, reanimate Fanatic, try and get back a troll, etc. So, but this card is just so powerful when it's in your deck, and it's a new angle of these fair games where, all of a sudden this life swing can matter in a race. It can't be killed by Fatal Push. It's just some, it just adds another dimension. I think also getting to actual 6 lands in play becomes more of a thing with 4 trolls and 3 fanatics. I mean, some games will even go to that spot. And maybe we're going to see that today. I can't remember the details, but we have a cool match lined up after this in the Reanimator mirror where a lot of these topics are at stake. So, out of the sideboard, my sideboard strategy, as many of you know, is to board into a blue-black mid-range deck, basically. I want these 10 cards with the logic that, you know, snowball threat, 3-mana threat, good removal, catch-all answers / tempo flyer, and then 3 Pharaoh Macaques to basically be a 0-mana answers to opposing reanimation spells. That's kind of the place I want to be. And I bring out my top end of the deck, that being, you know, Entomb, that being the 2 fatties, and that being Force of Will. And then I'm left with, you know, Daze, because my opponent might still have 3 drops, and Daze is, you know, situationally great. I will say against great players, when you already notice that they're really respecting Daze, you can consider cutting at them, but it's not really, you know, that it's basically if you want Force of Wills or Dazes for me. The last card I want to talk about before we get to the game is Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize is just this card where it's just going to be good in most cases unless you're, you know, really behind on board, because it's always going to get you the information. It's going to take your opponent's best card that lines up the best against your hand, and only you have that information. I will say that when you Thoughtseize and choose something, that also says a lot about your hand, and if the opponent can pick up on that stuff, all of a sudden there's a game of information. So sometimes we need to be a little bit, let's say we see a hand. Let me give you a random example I just thought about. You see a hand with Barrogoyf in it. You know they can cast it next turn, but you take something else because you believe that you not taking Barrogoyf means that you have the Daze for it, and the opponent will register that and then delay the play. That could be a reason to take the second best card because you realize you're going to buy some time regardless. Random example I just thought of, but Thoughtseize is a very complex card. I suggest you practice it a lot. All right, that was kind of the theory about how these games usually play out. Of course, there are numerous corner cases. I will say the sideboard games generally last a while. Let's say we just draw the same cards. I draw a push and a frog and a whatever. My opponent does the same, right? Then we have to find our advantages, and I think those are the games. I usually call those games are up for grabs, which basically means we can't win if the opponent goes, I don't know, turn 1 Thoughtseize to 2 frog, Force Will my Fatal Push, attack a few times and build a big hand. Like, we can't win those games, so we have to focus on the games that are actually up for grabs. So with that being said, I have a match lined up from a fresh challenge top 8, and yeah, let's see how that went, and let's see if we can learn something from it. All right, guys, quick message here. If you want to have access to my deck guides, my strategy articles, whether you want to pitch me a sweet deck to play on the channel, whether you want to look into coaching, or simply just want to say thank you for the content I put out, please check out my Patreon below and become a Baron today. Now, let's get back to the games. All right, I believe I'm at 2-0 at this point in a challenge. That doesn't really matter. It's mainly that this is a competitive setting. This is again a competent player. We're both trying our hardest to win, right? Okay, so what do we have in this hand? This hand is pretty optimal. I even have a couple brainstorms to set up the Fanatic later on if the opportunity arises. I have a Daze. I'm on the draw here, so I do note that I'm not very well set up against Psychic Frog, but that's just how it goes. Like, we have good spells and a couple of lands, so let's go for it. And now all of a sudden we see an interesting play. Okay, this is cool. We get Thoughtseize. So what will our opponent take here? I imagine my opponent will take probably the card Reanimate. That's like my best guess. Okay, Reanimate hits the graveyard. My opponent is leaving me with Daze, and they basically just make a mental note of that. And also, the brainstorms are kind of redundant, so yeah, I like taking the Reanimate. Here, I decided to go on Underground Sea Pass, and I think the logic here, from my point of view, is if my opponent plays a Psychic Frog, my opponent has no way of knowing that I just drew this Fatal Push, and I don't want to blow my fetch land if I can help it. I realize I can get Wastelanded here, but then I just cast, then I cast a Brainstorm, and maybe I'll be fine. My opponent goes Underground Sea. What does that tell me? That basically tells me that my opponent might not have more lands. That could be a reason to play out Swamp turn 1. But let's see. Here's Brainstorm. So the cool thing about this is, with my opponent's land from turn 1 being a Swamp, I don't believe my opponent can play many more spells here unless it's actual second Thoughtseize, but I guess they also hold up Fatal Push here. I believe I fire off a Brainstorm here to kind of not waste my mana, maybe find a Psychic Frog. Yeah, these cards are not amazing. I believe I get rid of a Fanatic, and then I'm kind of forced to draw the other card. I don't get rid of Fanatic. Oh, this is cool. Okay, so I keep Fanatic because it's still, you know, good friends with that Brainstorm. That makes a lot of sense. A little bit of a Miracle bluff here. Believe. Can't really... So now I have two options, right? I can pass and play better in around days if it comes to Psychic Frog, or I can start brainstorming now and look for Thoughtseize, basically. So not many good hits in the deck, I will say. Also worth noting is, you sometimes slow roll cycling your Troll of Khazad-dûm in this matchup, for good reason, because if you don't have Reanimation to follow up and the opponent has, it's kind of a problem. So my opponent cycling this, I don't know, it says they have Reanimation and or they needed to land, so not a big play here. Oh, yeah. So here, basically, this is basically the first topic I talked about. Sometimes entombing, Atraxa, and Reanimating, it just wins the game, right? So let's see if that's the case here. I decided to, let's see here, I pitched the days over the Brainstorm because I'm basically saying I'm fine losing to the second Reanimate. Let's say this works, then I can get Reanimated here. But I don't want to play around the second Reanimate compared to, you know, actually having stuff to do later in this game. Because if my opponent sees me pitch a Brainstorm, they know about the days from earlier. They can easily slow down, make that days a dead card. So I like this decision. If they have second Reanimate, it is what it is. But it turns out they had a Force of Will going down to one card. Here I will, simply for optimization's sake, since I need to hit two very specific cards, those being Force of Will and blue card, I end up sacking for Surveil. I don't respect days here once my opponent has already pitched. They will, in most cases, in my opinion, pitch the days and keep the Ponder with similar theory as to why I did how I did. Here, I'm actually going to get rid of the Brazen Borrower on the Surveil because I need to hit the actual card Force of Will, and then I just hope that the blue card is also there. Trying to dig as deep as possible. I miss, and I lose this game. So, not much to report here. Thoughtseize, Entomb, Reanimate, Force of Will. Those cards, those are simply just cards that will win game one when there's no hate cards involved. So let's say this was another game and I had a Fairy Macabre, my opponent's line would look terrible. But that's just how it goes. Sometimes, you know, Jack in the Box will beat the slow and steady wins the race type draw, and that's exactly what happened here. Let's move on to the next game. All right, so it's time for game two, backs against the wall. Here you can see my sideboard plan. All the mid-range stuff is in. All the combo plus 4 Force Wills has been relegated to the sideboard. How do I feel about this hand? So I think this hand is just fine. There's the good old combo of Metamorphosis, Fanatic, and Brainstorm. I mean, there's a Fairy Macabre. This hand is, you know, an average hand. Brainstorm kind of saves this hand. Big old Floodist and pass. It's super minor. Floodstrain does not have the same flexibility when it comes to fetching both types of basics, but I don't think it's that relevant once I have a Troll of Khazad-dûm and multiple fetch lands. Turn 1 Ponder, pretty standard setup. Let's see what I go for here. Surveil. I see a Frog. Yeah, Frog is great, especially if my opponent has to daze it. It's kind of annoying. The most realistic thing is it dies to a Fatal Push, and that's just, you know, how it goes. We ask our opponent the question, and then we basically see what they come up with. I will also say if it gets dazed or pushed, then it's very likely I can set up a cool Brainstorm plus Fanatic turn later. So that's my mindset here. And at the same time, if my opponent tries to reanimate it, I can Fairy Macabre it. So I like my spot here. Well, I should say I like my spot, except if my opponent likes what happened game one a lot, they will have, you know, the Entomb package, and that no, wait a minute, I have the Macabre. Never mind. Yeah, I'm very ready to see Entomb getting cast. So yeah, pretty well-rounded hand here. I'm kind of weak against my opponent's Frog, but, you know, what can you do? Let's see what my opponent has lined up for turn 2 here. Thoughtseize first. I like it a lot, depending on what my opponent's following up with. Oh, my opponent takes Brainstorm here. So taking Brainstorm here is basically saying, if I take the Brainstorm, it's kind of like, you know, making your Fanatic bad as well. And I'll take my licks if, you know, you Fairy Macabre in response to Reanimate in the future. I actually like this play a lot by the opponent, but I also like it from my point of view in the game because it also says my opponent is not planning to, you know, Reanimate Atraxa or Archon anytime soon. Okay, so my opponent kills it with Fatal Push, and that makes a lot of sense, especially when I talked about the Fanatic line. I draw another Brainstorm. This is quite cool. So now, this is actually why I decided to include this game, because, you know, on the surface, you know, I just got Atraxa game 1, sure, but I feel like there was a lot of, you know, theoretical stuff that was worth tying into what actually happened, and it's the same here. So, I will just... This is not intuitive, right? I fetched before my Brainstorm, but that's because I have a Miracle card. So I'm actually looking to have the upside of finding a 2-drop here. Another Frog would be amazing. And that's why I fetched before, because I don't want to mess up my deck when it comes to Brainstorm and fetches. So I do find an Animate dead, and this is actually quite a close decision. I think I end up reanimating the Frog here, which is just another good 2-drop. I put the Miracle back. So let's say I get dazed here. I've put the Miracle back on my deck. I don't get dazed. I have a Frog in play now. I don't care about the Troll in hand. And the Troll is actually comboing with the Miracle guy. So let's imagine we get to my next turn. Then what I'm going to do is, in response to Miracle Creature, I'll just pump my Psychic Frog to play around Daze. Troll of Khazad-dûm is now in my graveyard, and then I will get it back with the Miracle Creature, the Fanatic. So I really like my position here. My opponent's answer to Psychic Frog is, you know, only going to be removal spells. I have push from my opponent's Frog. I'm loving life at this point. And I have the Broken Ankle shut down. So it turns out my opponent did not do a whole lot here. I believe, yeah, the concession comes in here after a couple of Brainstorms. But that is only because my opponent knew about the Fanatic, and I Brainstormed the Fanatic on top of the deck. They knew about the Troll. I discard the Troll to play around Daze, as I talked about, because remember, Animate Dead shrinks the Frog with 1 power, so I need to discard a card to it anyway. Discard that on my upkeep or draw step or whatever, just in response to the actual Fanatic, not in response to the trigger, then I can't return it, but in response to the card or the Miracle trigger is all fine. Then I get a Troll into play, and all of a sudden, my opponent is facing a huge board. I think there's also... Yeah, I guess this was just... I just had the perfect mix of cards here. Like, presenting back-to-back Frogs, having the graveyard under control, and setting up the Miracle, while even having a Fatal Push my opponent didn't know about. I guess I just had the perfect hand here, but that was like the ideal run-out for, you know, Unconsistent Frog winning the game. Alright, that's game 2. Game 3 is the real treat, so please don't go anywhere. Alright guys, if you made it this far, thanks so much. Now let's get into the real good stuff. Alright, game 3, I'm on the draw here. Have a decent looking hand, kind of looks like the previous one. Couple of lands, a little bit of interaction, some solid stuff, and then a Metamorphosis Fanatic. Trying to figure out if it can actually, you know, do some broken things, or it's mainly gonna be a clunky card. Alright, my opponent's on 7 cards, Polluted Delta Pass, that can mean a lot. Cycle Troll, go for a Surveil, who knows. I draw Basic Island, and now I actually have my first choice to make. So I want to have Daze up turn 1, and I don't want to get dazed. Is there any way that if my opponent goes Land Pass again, I want Surveil available? I think that's the case, so I hope I play out a Fetch Land here, despite just drawing the island. Fetch Land is played. With that logic, always, when I play, I'm thinking in scenarios. What if this, or that happens? And then I'm trying to hedge. What's the highest probability? You know, and I'm basically just choosing the scenarios that I want to optimize. Because at the end of the day, you can't optimize everything, but you can optimize what is, you know, going to be the most devastating, or what's going to be the most likely. You know, a combination of those things, the sense of urgency versus the probability. I will say that's like a pretty good rule of thumb. My opponent goes for Surveil and keeps the card. Here's Psychic Frog, which is annoying. It's a card I have to daze. Good news is I can't get dazed back. Then I brainstorm away the miracle guy. Now I can't set it up. Have to draw the island. The miracle guy is currently on top of my deck. So I'm fetching that away. I hope I go for a basic. The reason to go for basic here is basically because it lets me bridge to 2 without getting wasted, and then when I have my second basic in play, I'm bridging to 3 without getting wasted, which can be useful. Let's say I draw something like a Barrogoyf. So let's see here. I'm trying to reanimate my opponent's creature. This is a fine play, right? If I get pushed, whatever. If I get dazed, whatever. If I get forced, that's actually great. If I get macabre, great. So I get dazed here, which was, I guess, the best scenario for the opponent. Then they're straight back with the basic island. I note that they play out the basic island that they just returned, which is always something to keep an eye out for. A little bit of ponder. And now let's see what I can do here. I can play a second frog into... Yeah, that just seems reasonable. My opponent kept the cards on ponder. I draw my own ponder, which is a fine, blind draw after shuffling away the Fanatic. But I think my play is pretty clearly going to be Psychic Frog. If my opponent has second days, I'm a sad guy. This is actually where the information from the other games came into play. I want to mention this because it's very important. You notice how the opponent plays around days, and you make note of it. So let's say the opponent respects days a lot. You can make note of it, and then you can make plays that, for instance here, if I get pushed end of turn here, it's not very strong, but I actually expect my opponent, even if they have the push, I expect my opponent to not cast it because they don't want to get dazed. But, I mean, who knows? It's just something to think about. Psychic Frog's on the table. Passing the turn. I have the yard under control if broken things happen. I have push in case of another frog. I have ponder to let the show go on. Excuse me for the waiting time. I had a lot of stuff to do during this game away from the computer, so that's why I'm using up a lot of clock here and why the clicks don't always work. All right, opponent's upkeep, opponent's draw step, and here's a Fanatic. So my opponent does not respect days here. They set up the Fanatic with ponder. Pretty nice way to get back the frog, but now I have a big decision, right? So if I Fairy Macabre the frog, I still have to deal with a 4/4. So the frog right now is not the problem. Does that make sense? I have a fatal push for the frog. This 4/4 is going to be good in a longer game. So how do I get a Fanatic off the table when I've boarded into fair? Okay, so I'm down to a couple of Dark Betrayals. I have one Shoot the Sheriff, and then I have a couple of Brazens. Then I have my own Fanatics. So most likely the Fanatics are going to come off the table by either getting destroyed or getting traded in combat. And if that happens, it will go to the graveyard, and if that happens, my opponent can now reanimate it. So this is actually my logic here, and I like it a lot. I'm saying this game is going to be incredibly long, so I'm not going to use my Fairy Macabre now. I'm simply just going to kill the frog, and then I'm going to fly over, and then I'm going to, draw my cards. My opponent can gain a bunch of life, but I have a lot of turns to come up with an answer. Let's see how that works out for me. Also, this is going to say to my opponent, I don't have yard interaction, which maybe can catch them off guard later. Wasteland, and now it looked like a genius, right? Because island and swamp in play, protected mana, talking about bridging from 1 to 2, bridging from 2 to 3. Pretty cool. So now my play will be pretty standard. Let's see how I decide to go about things when it comes to the troll. I feel like the right play here is to Fatal Push off of Underground Sea to make sure the Wasteland never disrupts me. But let's see how I play it out. Maybe I ponder first. Unclear. Let's see. I draw Daze, which is probably a quite solid card here. Let's see how I lead. I believe Oh yeah, I like this play a lot. So I'm attacking here, even letting my opponent block with the Metamorphosis Fanatic, even blocking with Frog. What is the opponent going to do here? If my opponent blocks with Fanatic, I'm ready to discard 3 cards. My opponent blocks with Frog. They're behind on cards. I have 6 versus 4. So, in my opinion, I don't have to use 3 cards from my graveyard here. I believe my opponent will simply not block. Which proves to be true here, which is always a good thing. I decided to not pump it. I think that's pretty standard. Trying to brainstorm. So now I have plenty of stuff to do, and mana is kind of my choke point. I know I need to push that Frog on this turn cycle. And as I said, I'm not too worried about getting hit by Fnatic, even though, you know, it will give my opponent time, you know, many turns from now when I'm actually trying to turn the corner. So let's see what I do here. Maybe I like my hand enough that I ponder. It's like a good rule of thumb. I actually go for brainstorming here. Oh, yeah, because I have the Troll to shuffle, I guess. This is fine. So Daze, I don't believe, is going to be a good card by the looks of things. I push the Frog, and then I ponder in the end here with the intention to... Oh, right. Good detail here. I decide to never get dazed, basically, this game again. So I decide to not ponder and simply cycle Troll for that mana for 2 reasons. Don't want to get dazed. Second reason is I actually want to shuffle and get fresh cards, where if I ponder and shuffle, I'm basically just cycling ponder with the shuffle. But I'm actually going to see 3 freshies if I shuffle first. So I like this. And also I found the Dark Betrayal, which is quite cool. Okay, so... Now we have another question. My opponent's reanimating the Frog once more. So now, again, same choice. I can Pheromocob it, or I can let it resolve and kill it with Dark Betrayal. Let's see what I go for. I let it resolve once more. So now, twice in a row, I did not bite on the Pheromocob. Let's see if it pays off. Opponent cycles for a basic swamp, gets in for 4. Just basically learning if I have Dismember or not. I like that play. I go to 14. My opponent's back to 20. So yeah, this is going to be a long one if I can win this game. Here's Animate dead on the Troll. So now I don't think I can. I can't hold it any longer. I'm gonna Pheromocob the Troll out of the graveyard. And now we're kind of playing fair, you know? Cycling Troll for an Underground Sea standard. I draw Thoughtseize. Okay, so now I want to Thoughtseize first. Then I want to kill the Frog, and then I want to attack. So now I'm down to, once again, Frog versus Metamorphosis Fanatic, but I have a Ponder and an ongoing Ophidian to try and overcome that card. Thoughtseize. My opponent has 2 copies of Baragoyf. The hand was 2 copies of Baragoyf, which is terrible news, because that is a card that is a must-kill as well. So here, the reason why I ponder first instead of Dark Betraying is if I find the card Fatal Push, it's better to Fatal Push a Frog, because Dark Betrayal is just the superior removal spell in the matchup. I found a Shoot the Sheriff, so now I actually think I make a tiny misplay, because now I have to play either of these removal spells, and they're both, you know, destroy target creature. There's not any drawbacks to it. The only difference is the commander mana cost, right? So if I kill the Frog with Dark Betrayal, I can find my Surveil land. If I kill Frog with Shoot the Sheriff, I can't find my Surveil land, but I can later. Let's see what I go for. Yeah, this just doesn't make any sense. Like, fetching here, I guess... Oh, okay, I had to shuffle here. Okay. Yeah, I should have gone Surveil here, and then 1 mana kill the Frog, then draw into, you know, a non-random card off the Frog. Yeah, that was not a good play. Okay, darn. So, a little bit of room for improvement here. Because the reason why it's better is that when I do that, I'm setting up my... This would be a better card than a land. That's the first thing. And the other thing is, next turn, it's unlikely that this costing 1 mana instead of 2 mana is going to matter too much, right? Because I had 5 mana available. What are the odds that I need 5 mana next turn? Not that high. So... A little bit of suboptimal play here. My opponent plays Baragoyf, which is now the superior creature, but now the clock is actually ticking. So let's see. The Metamorphosis Fanatic Puts me to 7 here. I mean, drawing that land is a bad draw, but I still have the Undercity Sewers in my deck, so I guess it's less bad, but, you know, could have avoided it. Sometimes when you don't make the right play, you just need to, you know, move on. It's like the old highlight from the Pro Tour where I can't remember who it was, but some player cast a Rite of Flame, did not realize they didn't have enough mana for Dragonstorm, and then just, you know, decided to play a Ponder and pass the turn. So yeah, sure, there's a Rite of Flame gone, but, you know, things must go on here. Ponder is a great draw. Ponder works great with the fetch land. Let's see how I decide to play it. Could see E giving flying first. Could see pondering first. Okay, so Thoughtseize 2 lands. Definitely a shuffle here, and I draw into a land, so this is not good. I kill that. I'm not sure I like how I play it here. I think it's better to give flying out of the graveyard, attack first, see what happens. Pretty sure about that, actually. Also, here was another chance for me to surveil before drawing a random card, but the upside is I can draw a 2-drop. This is quite close. This is just a judgment call. The other thing was inferior, but I actually think this is a good judgment. A solid judgment call. But, you know, fetching the sewers would also have been just fine. Let's see what I can draw here from the frog trigger. Perfect scenario is something that I guess kills the Fanatic or reanimates or something along those lines. Yeah, I mean, animate dead, what a draw. So now I can animate dead my opponent's Baragoyf or my own Troll. Unclear which is the best, especially with the Brazen Borrower in the mix, as we talked about in the introduction. I think I go for the lifelink creature here. Starting to get a little bit scared. I feel like I should just go Underground Sea here. I get dazed. Wow, yeah. So this is also another cool one. So I've worried about daze for a lot of turns, all the way up to this point, and then I get dazed. It's really a good lesson that if a card is relevant 5 turns ago, or 4 turns ago, or 3 turns ago, it's still relevant. The only difference is my opponent had more time to draw it. I will say I saw my opponent's hand with the 2 Baragoyfs, so I had decent odds here, and if I pass the turn here instead of casting Animate Dead, I'm kind of a sicko, so I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna tell myself that that was correct, but, you know, it's worth thinking about. I'm now at 3 life, so things are getting iffy. My opponent has 1 card in hand. No information about that card, so I mean, could be anything from a land to a Naked Force Will. Now I draw my own Baragoyf. Also, I should have thought more about keeping cards in hand here in case I would ever have to play defensive with the frog. I keep attacking here without going for the Surveil land. I'm not quite sure I'm playing this correctly. Psychic Frog getting in there. Drawing a card off Psychic Frog. I draw a Fanatic, which is a reason to play out land. So now I believe I go Baragoyf plus land. I now lose to removal spell. Playing out the land. Let's see how many Underground Seas are gone. 1 Underground Sea gone. So that means I'm not, you know, running short on lands, but I have exactly enough. Here's Animate Dead on, let's see. Animate Dead on a Baragoyf. My opponent, yeah, that was the best card. All right. So now it's Baragoyf versus Baragoyf, but I can attack first, kind of force the trade here. Now I could go for my Surveil. Better late than never, I guess. What can we find on top of our deck with the Undercity Sewers? 2 life, not a lot to work with. Come on, Magic Online, you can do it. I have a replay video to finish. Here's Reanimate. I actually get rid of Reanimate here, despite me knowing that I'm getting 5 life here. Unclear if that's good or bad. The card Reanimate is not getting cast this turn, I know that much, but it could be next turn. And here, I miracle a Fanatic where my turn was going to be, you know, just casting a Fanatic. So pretty nice. I'm going to miracle Fanatic and bring back a lifelink Troll here, I believe. Also, I can give Frog Flying and get in there. So, oh yeah, I decided to go all in here. This is cool. So, with this on the stack, I can discard another Fanatic to Frog and try and go completely bonkers. So, I will target the other Fanatic, which will then target the Troll. Then I have a ton of power on the battlefield. Fanatic, bringing back Troll. For the invest on a 2 mana? Come on now. So now, as you can see, it's only the time that can prevent me from winning this game. I think that's fair to say. My opponent's at 25. Get my Frog Flying. Attack with that and Baragoyf. Feel like my opponent has to trade here. Yeah, definitely has to trade. And then, I mean, I have 4 creatures against 1, and it's just a matter of, you know, finishing this game in time, I feel like. Drawing a card off a Frog. Enemy dead. Leaving the battlefield, sure. Draw trigger. Drawing Ponder. Might as well optimize here on second main. See if I can find anything brutal. Another Frog. Another Reanimation. Unclear. Yeah, a card like Reanimator would be nice to kind of, you know, have the security. Also worth noting, I have 1 Underground Sea left in my deck as fetchable. Which is somewhat relevant because having 6 lands in play is actually something with this build. I do find a Reanimator, and I believe that's the icing on the cake. I was just about to say that ices the game. My opponent can't attack. I simply have bigger creatures. My opponent's playing for time here, which I can't blame them. That's just the name of the game. I was super slow this game. Had some other stuff going on. You know, that's how it goes sometimes. I can do whatever I want with my 25 minutes, and so can my opponent. I decided to draw the Reanimate here instead of fetching. I can give my Frog Flying here, attack for a bunch. This will give me 14 life. My opponent will be dead next turn, I think. Maybe not if they block. I'm not sure. My opponent should probably block here. Okay, Purse the Frog, block a 4/4. Okay, so my opponent's living a little longer here. I think what I'm going to do now is Reanimate, Fanatic, bring back Baragoyf, and that's just amazing, right? So many creatures. Reanimate, Fanatic. I can bring back Baragoyf. I can bring back Frog here. I hope I bring back Baragoyf. It's just the bigger beater at this point. And how much damage do I have now? I have 10. I have 19 damage. So my opponent still has a couple of turns here. My Reanimator is, you know, maybe going to be useful. I guess something like, I don't know, Archon could maybe give my opponent a shot here. Fetch out my last land, and then a miracle another Fanatic. That's so funny. So it turns out now I have all my creatures in play. I attack my opponent down to 2, I believe. I don't mill here for time purposes, and yeah, I mean, I get the job done with, I don't know, like 20 seconds left on the clock or something. It got a bit close in the end, but I actually think this game was definitely worth sharing because it's not, you know, it's not like a crazy unique game. I actually think it's quite realistic that the games are down to these incredibly grind fests. And I think it's also fair to say that if I bite on the Reanimator earlier here, I'm at a disadvantage compared to what I did, which is saying, okay, a 4/4 lifelinker. I play those guys myself. So I have, over time, I can beat that card before it kills me, because this Pharaoh Macabre is going to be more impactful later, and my deck is filled with, my own 4/4, some removal, bigger creatures like Troll or Baragoyf, and, just having the playing for a longer game instead of a shorter game when it becomes grindy. But I don't know. I hope this was helpful. We saw both the Turbo Atraxa, we saw the Uncontested Frog, we saw the long mid-range grindfests with some close calls when it comes to my Pharaoh Macabres. A little bit of fetch surveil play I can work on for sure, and you should as well, because at the end of the day, the fact that you can manipulate just one draw instead of drawing a random card can be the difference between winning and losing. And I think that's going to be the closing thoughts today, that any small decision can, be the reason you won the game or the reason you lost the game. So we should treat all the details as, very important stuff. All right. With that being said, I'm done for today. I don't know if you want to call this a lecture or a masterclass or a piece of inspiration. You can do whatever you want. This is how I play the blue-black matchup, and I wish you good luck in your next Legacy tournament. Bye, guys.